Today we're talking about how to transform your wildlife footage into something you would see on those professional nature documentaries on National Geographic or Netflix or the BBC. And there are some basic fundamentals that you really need to know before you really start to get to that next level of creating incredible wildlife footage. And if you implement these strategies, I can guarantee your footage is going to look so professional and look so good. But before we get into that, if I could kindly ask you to like this video, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button because it really goes a long way. So I've had an incredible career working as a wildlife cinematographer. I've got to travel the world telling stories for National Geographic, Netflix, BBC, Disney+, all the big streaming platforms, but I didn't just pick up a camera one day and had some natural gift. In the beginning, my shots were terrible. I didn't understand the basics of how to create shots I saw in those wildlife documentaries. But I worked incredibly hard. I found mentors, watched a lot of how-to videos on YouTube, and I practiced a lot. And there's one skill that when I finally figured it out, everything just made so much sense. So the first thing you need to really sort out is your frame rates. The mistake that most people make is that they go out and they shoot everything at 60 frames a second or 120 frames a second. And I was guilty of that too when I first started. When I got my first camera that could shoot slow motion, I was shooting everything at like 120 frames a second or 60 frames a second. When you're shooting 60 frames a second or 120 frames a second, this is usually used to emphasize some type of action or create some kind of drama. Or sometimes you just have an animal that moves really, really fast and you need to slow it down just to have them in frame. Sometimes you're only with them for 2 seconds and you can slow that down to 120 frames a second. Well, you just extended the amount of footage that you get. So using high frame rates or over cranking it is really a valuable tool to have when you need it. But just to shoot everything at 120 frames a second isn't really necessary. My go-to is if it's a big wide and I'm just getting an establisher, I'll shoot 30 frames a second. If it's a mid-size shot, sometimes I'll do 60. Sometimes if I'm really tight, I'll do 120 frames a second if I'm really close. But it also depends on the action of the animal. So some animals move incredibly fast, like this hummingbird right here. These hummingbirds travel so fast, and sometimes I only get a couple of seconds with them. So having these specialty high-speed cameras really helps out a lot, where I can slow things down to 600 frames a second and be able to slow that motion down and just show the beauty of these animals and how they move and how they maneuver. So you really want to think about the action and what's required to tell this story. Okay, now this tip is interesting because I don't know how many times I've been out in the field with people shooting video and they come out with this incredibly expensive lens. They'll come out with a big 600mm prime. They've got a monitor, they've got a mic, they've got all this cool stuff, and yet they've got the flimsiest tripod you could imagine. They think that this big heavy rig is what's going to support their camera. They're going to be able to get these amazing shots, but the reality is if you don't have really solid support for your camera, there's just no way you're going to be able to get the shots you want. So I recommend getting something that has a minimum of 75mm bowl. Even better would be 100mm bowl. That's what I use for my Komodo X and my 60-600 rig. So like with everything, I always put links in the description. So I do have a couple of recommendations off Amazon that I recommend. So if you can go in the description, I'll have links to everything that I could recommend. Now, this is kind of like one of those bonus tips that I throw in when I'm talking about tripods and fluid heads. One thing that I think a lot of people forget about is that they leave their image stabilization on. And now when your camera is on a tripod, it doesn't need image stabilization. And actually what your sensor is trying to do is trying to correct for something. When there's nothing to correct for, it'll just kind of bounce it around. You'll see like this funny little jerking motion happening every once in a while. And that's your image stabilization, just trying to stabilize something that doesn't need to be stabilized because you're on a tripod. So you have to turn that feature off or else you're just gonna get some really funky looking shots. And another tip I have is to shoot manual focus as much as you possibly can. For most scenarios, when we're shooting out in these wild places, there's just so much grass and sticks and twigs that can really trick your camera, and all of a sudden your autofocus will start to hunt and pulse, and that is just so distracting and nobody wants to see that. Even if you lose focus with manual focus, racking your focus back to your subject is a lot more smooth than this big snap, because you don't want to see that big snap going back to it. That just like screams that you're shooting in autofocus and you're probably an amateur. So I definitely recommend learning to shoot with manual focus and turn that autofocus off. So my next tip is really understanding how to build a sequence and getting a lot of variety in your shots. When you spend more than just a few moments with an animal and you get some time to like really work with them and you start to see their behavior and what they're up to and their patterns, that's the key to building a strong wildlife sequence. Start with an establishing shot, a wide shot or a drone shot to show where the animal lives. Then grab details of the environment. There's so many other animals that live in this ecosystem, and you could really build out more of a setting when you show other animals that live in this environment. Once you understand the rhythm and flow of this environment, you can start to build coverage. I like to get wide shots to show movement, medium shots for action, and tight shots for detail. And don't forget to let your animal leave frame. It just works so well with editing. Let the behavior repeat itself. Don't rush it. Think in moments, not individual shots. And that's how you turn behavior into a story. And when I figured out this technique, that's when everything just like fell into place and made so much more sense. And every time I watch a wildlife documentary, it's just undeniable. This is the technique they use again and again and again. And that is getting backlight. Like I base a lot of my shoots around the direction of the sun and the light, and I use these apps like Sunseeker to figure out not only where the sun is, but where the sun will be. And I'll try to position myself and move my blind around, or I'll just like plan out my entire day based on where the sun's gonna be, because I wanna get that backlit shot. And I guarantee you, if you start watching a lot of these nature documentaries, you'll definitely see it. And it says everything is backlit. They always try to have the sun behind the animal. And it just makes your footage look so much more cinematic. All right, so let's recap this. You've got all your settings dialed in. You're not shooting everything at 120 frames a second. You've got a rock solid tripod and fluid head. That's a 75mm bowl or 100mm bowl. You have got your lens stabilization turned off. You've got your autofocus turned off. And now you're on location and you're getting your establishing shots, you're getting your mid shots, you're getting your tight shots, you're getting all the details of the environment. And last but not least, you are getting all your shots that are backlit. And you implement all these tips, I can guarantee you your footage is gonna look so professional and so cool. And please let me know if you have any questions regarding any of these tips. So thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one.